In 1967, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip. Shortly thereafter, Israel established Jewish-only settlements within the tiny exclave, which would eventually give them control over 30% of the Strip. Now, from 1967 to the early 2000s, a lot of things happened, things that I'm not going to go deep into for the sake of time. But just so everyone can get some context, years of occupation of the occupied territories led to two uprisings, commonly known as intifadas, which sandwich a series of negotiations in the 90s between the State of Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. By the time these negotiations began to collapse, the Second Intifada had begun, and a new Israeli Prime Minister was chosen, Ariel Sharon. Whether he had intended it or not, or whether he could possibly have foreseen it, Sharon was one of the many dominoes that led to the Second Intifada, and by 2003, after many Israelis had been killed in attacks from Palestinian militants, Sharon made an announcement regarding the future of the Gaza Strip. Arguing that the Palestinians were not partners for peace, Sharon declared that he would unilaterally remove settlements from Gaza and parts of the West Bank. From the day he announced it to the date of its actual implementation, the reasons for which this removal of settlements was done would be laid out by Sharon and other Israeli government officials. In his speech, Sharon argued that his plan was being done for security interests as well as an attempt to strengthen its control of other areas in the land of Israel, which will constitute an inseparable part of the State of Israel. This desire from Sharon to abandon the Gaza Strip in order to focus on other areas of the West Bank for settlement is evidenced in the fact that the year that 8,000 settlers left Gaza, 12,000 more entered other parts of the West Bank. In spite of this evidence, Sharon's disengagement with Gaza is often portrayed as a good faith attempt at achieving peace. Testimony from his inner circle contradicts this. According to Sharon's top aide, Dov Weissglass, the disengagement is actually formaldehyde. It supplies the amount of formaldehyde that is necessary so that there will not be a political process with the Palestinians. Essentially, the Israeli government realized that the cost-to-benefit ratio of expanding settlements in an already super densely populated area was just not worth the international pressure or the violent resistance against the settlement regime. The West Bank, on the other hand, was bigger, more sparsely populated, had more room for expansion, and could potentially be settled until it was ripe for annexation, without needing to include too many Palestinians that would upset Israel's Jewish majority. This was confirmed as such by then Deputy Prime Minister Shimon Peres. We are disengaging from Gaza because of demography. Hamas, which is regarded as a terrorist organization by the West, on the other hand, claims that it and violent resistance in general is primarily responsible for the withdrawal from Gaza. This argument, made by Hamas, was very essential in boosting their popularity. Palestinians, for some odd reason, don't like being ruled by a military occupation and an apartheid state. Truly, the strangest creatures on the planet. And this argument that it was primarily Hamas's use of violence struck a chord in Palestine. Regardless of the reason, Israel withdrew its settlers from Gaza, and by September 12th, Israel's troops and settlers were gone. Hamas's ability to take credit for this, the utter incompetence of Fatah, the increase in the amount of settlers, the compounding of Palestine's corruption and economic woes, and a variety of other factors led to a Hamas victory in the parliamentary elections on January 25th in the year of 2006. They won 76 out of the 132 seats of the Legislative Council. Now, almost immediately after they withdrew their settlers, Israel enacted a series of closures, which restricted goods and people going into Gaza, and built a 229.659-foot wall between Gaza and Egypt. But after the electoral victory of Hamas, Israel and the United States would pressure Palestine and Gaza even more severely. Israel had withheld $55 million in Palestine's tax and custom duties revenue, and prevented Hamas parliamentarians from traveling, under the leadership of one Ehud Olmert. The United States, led by one George W. Bush, went even further than Israel. They asked Gulf countries to stop giving financial aid to Palestine. Most countries refused, and conditioned any aid on the acceptance of Bush's roadmap to peace and other previous agreements accepting Israel and rejecting violence. Fatah reacted harshly to Hamas's victory. Leaders like Dahlan, whose job was combating the rise of Hamas in the 90s, advocated against unity, and the legislature gave President Mahmoud Abbas more power over security and the judiciary. Abbas also pressed Hamas to accept America's conditions. But when you lose an election as bad as Fatah did, you can't really make demands, and Hamas formed a cabinet without them, with Ismail Haniyeh as the prime minister. Abbas took many efforts to separate Hamas from broader institutions of the PLO, which caused Hamas to feel that he was conspiring against them. As Khaled Meshal put it, "Some members of our flesh and blood are conspiring against us. They are executing a premeditated plan to ensure we fail. Not for their personal gain, but to serve the interests of the enemy. They starve their people and encourage chaos." Was Abbas conspiring with the US and Israel against Hamas? Well, not to throw mud at the glorious record of my Lord and Savior Mahmoud Abbas, in early June 2006, Israel had secretly sent Fatah trucks full of arms, and the United States had earlier begun a trained and equipped mission to bolster Fatah. In the event of a civil war between Fatah and Hamas, the Americans wanted Fatah, the good guys as they called them, to win. In early 2007, the next year, Abbas called for new elections, and after a couple of assassination attempts on both sides, and a rise in clashes between Fatah and Hamas, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip throughout the course of June. Hamas justified this takeover by claiming that the US had been planning a coup against it, evidenced by American weaponry it had found in Gaza. When documents were released to the press, Hamas's side of the story was substantiated even more. As Dick Cheney's Middle East advisor put it, who resigned in protest of Bush's plan, "It looks to me that what happened wasn't so much a coup by Hamas, but an attempted coup by Fatah that was preempted before it could happen." As I begin to realize that I'm not making a video on the Fatah-Hamas civil war, I'm going to turn to the last bit of information that is necessary for me to establish the facts I will be examining for the broader point of this video. The financial blockade against Palestine was now focused entirely on Gaza. In fact, it ramped up to a new level, and the entire exclave was hermetically sealed. Gaza's border crossings were shut, and only the bare minimum amount of goods necessary to prevent a humanitarian crisis was allowed into Gaza. Gaza's economy was de-developed, and after many bombing campaigns, its infrastructure was blown to bits. I want to have the chance, in some time in the future, to go further in detail on these assaults. But for now, that's all I will say. Hamas, from 2007 till the modern day, manages the Gaza Strip without any Israeli settlers or IDF troops in the territory. This leaves us an important question to answer. If all of that is the case, is Gaza still occupied? All of the interested parties in this question have different answers. If you ask Israel, the Gaza Strip is not occupied. In fact, if you asked Israel, none of Palestine is occupied, not even the West Bank, which Israel argues is disputed territory. In regards to Gaza and its current situation, it is regarded as hostile territory. This isn't a concept under international law, they just made it up. The United States agreed with Israel at the time they made this announcement. If you ask the UN, the Gaza Strip is occupied. If you ask the Palestinian Authority, the Gaza Strip is occupied. If you ask human rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, the Gaza Strip is still occupied. Interestingly enough, Hamas's position is much more complicated here. Hamas consistently makes claims that it has shown Israel a defeat by pushing it out of Gaza. Recently, they have made statements like this. 16 years after the occupation was driven out of Gaza, which Hamas considers a national achievement and a prelude to liberating the rest of the Palestinian land, the resistance will remain active in all of the Palestinian cities, headed by the town of Beita, with all tools, forms, accumulation, and the increases of its strength until the defeat of the occupation from all of Palestine. One could infer from statements like this that Hamas considers the Gaza Strip to not be occupied. But to what extent this is their actual position is hard to say. For instance, they still refer to Israel as the occupation, and their ambiguity can probably be best explained by the rhetorical appeal in telling Palestinians that their method can feasibly liberate the rest of their country, and then being able to point to Gaza as proof of this. Oddly enough, Israel claiming that Gaza is no longer occupied is very helpful for Hamas's rhetoric here. However, I wouldn't go on to say that Hamas would take this position outside of an arena where its limited rhetorical usefulness doesn't apply, like in an international court. That is in fact what makes the debate on whether or not Gaza is occupied so important. Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas all claim that their actions are legitimate under international law, and whether or not Gaza is occupied is an important thing legally. After years of hoop jumping, the International Criminal Court has finally begun litigation in order to determine whether or not Israel has indeed committed war crimes after bombing Gaza back into the Stone Age. An important point in this case is whether or not Gaza can be considered occupied. An occupying power has certain obligations to the population that it is occupying, beyond the obligations that Israel would still be violating even if Gaza wasn't occupied. And shockingly, this would include not bombing them back to the Stone Age, among other things. Now, the ICC is going to be investigating everyone from Israel to Hamas. Hamas is entirely convinced that everything it has done is legal and that what Israel has done is illegal. When presented with the possibility of exacting legal consequences on Israel, I think Hamas will obviously commit to the position that Gaza is occupied unambiguously. In short, international law and its norms are thus very important towards this question. Since we hopefully now fully value the importance of this position, rhetorically and legally, finally I will answer the question of whether or not Gaza is occupied. The description of occupation under the relevant statute, the Hague Regulations, says that territory is considered occupied when it is actually placed under the authority of the hostile army. The occupation extends only to the territory where such authority has been established and can be exercised. As it is phrased in the discussions on the matter, the question of whether or not the Gaza Strip is occupied is predicated on whether or not Israel is applying effective control over the Gaza Strip. Engaging in the debate on this issue, Israel's Supreme Court said that since September 2005, Israel no longer has effective control over what happens in the Gaza Strip, and that therefore, since it doesn't have that effective control any longer, it must also no longer be occupying the Gaza Strip. It would be argued instead that Hamas are the ones with effective control over the Gaza Strip. But Hamas's belligerency against Israel doesn't preclude Israel from being the occupying power over the Gaza Strip, since Israel still has the ability to operate in Gaza at will. Partisan activity does not make an area stop being occupied, and Israel has still shown its ability and willingness to exert the control of its military forces upon Gaza multiple times. This argument is based on the assumption that Israel has no control over the Gaza Strip, which is just not true. Israel's blockade of Gaza is by all means a crime, which has caused an immense amount of suffering, and to this fact, the role of Egypt has often been mentioned as being understated. The idea being, if Israel's blockade of Gaza is what makes it an occupation, then Egypt must also be charged as Israel's partner in crime, so to speak. Egypt's role in the blockade of Gaza is in and of itself a condemnable act, which is probably just another in the laundry list of the dictatorship's crimes. But whether it is an occupation along with Israel is doubtful. Israel has long had an edge in the realm of effective control that Egypt just doesn't. Israel controls Gaza's airspace, its maritime borders, its population registry, which determines who is and isn't from Gaza and Palestine, its border crossings, its electricity, among other amenities, and has land within Gaza's border marked as a no-go zone, which it does not allow Gazans to enter unless they want to be shot at. And has land within Gaza's borders marked as a no-go zone, which it does not allow Gazans to enter unless they want to be shot at. All of this, put into the wider context of the relationship between Israel and Gaza, makes the case that Israel still occupies Gaza clear. This is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment on this video. I would like to thank a small YouTuber, Mr. Beat, for deciding to collaborate with me. I felt it was a great opportunity to give a much smaller YouTuber the ability to, expose himself to a wide audience. So thank you very much for your time. In all seriousness, I appreciate collaborating with the Mr. Beat. Thank you very much. His video is on Israel and Palestine compared, and I think you might enjoy watching that. I would now like to thank the patrons. If you would like to support me on this channel and have your, patron name read out at the end of the video, please consider becoming a patron. You are the reason I can continue to do this while I'm in law school. For real. Thanking the patrons, starting with Algerian general patron Misaki, the first of our kind. The Khalil, which is Avocado Kirby and Rod B. The Sadiq, which is martial law and pyrotic napalm. And the Rafiq, which is Ravignon. If you would like to be a named patron, consider paying $7 plus a month. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything, and like the video like a billion times. Thank you. Bye.